right, you guys can take a seat. I am Pastor Chris, so I'm back up here again. I have a couple of notes for you guys before we get started. One, the reason you're seeing me again is that Pastor Dan is out of town, so we have the building to ourselves. Yeah, I know, I'm excited too. Number two, if at any point during this message I stop and sound like I'm about to cough up a lung, I do not have COVID. I have tested negative. I have allergies. For some reason, God made me allergic to earth and then made me live on earth. So anybody with me there? Anybody else struggling? It's been a rough couple weeks. So there's also another challenge that I have today. I am up here to share both the message, but also an invitation. We're going to be talking a little bit about Team World Vision and running. And why this is hard is that because some of you don't like running. Some of you hate running. Some of you heard the word running and literally had a part of your body start to hurt. And so I've got to come up here and I've got to talk about that, but I've also got to give something broader than that, something bigger than that, so that we can all go home and apply something to our lives today, to live a little more like God wants us to live. And that feels like a challenge. And as I was praying about where to go with this, I decided that I wanted to share my story. Now, I've done this before. I've shared parts of my story in different messages before, so for some of you, you may have heard parts of this. And I was actually hesitant to do it again. I was like, I need to come up with something completely new. But then I just felt God keep saying on my heart, no, you need to share your story. And I thought back to a couple weeks ago when we had Confirmation Sunday. Was anybody here? Was that not powerful? It's always a weird Sunday because, there's no message, but there's a message. Like, to anybody outside coming in, it sounds like it's going to be like one of the worst Sundays ever. It's like a bunch of kids being talked about and reading their faith statements, but then you come and you experience it and you walk out, and I don't know about you, but I'm always hyped after that Sunday. In fact, it's one of my favorite Sundays of the year. And what makes that Sunday is that each of those students have a faith statement, which is the beginning of their faith journey or their story. And we talk to those students about the importance of sharing your story, about how Peter writes in the New Testament to always be ready to share your story, the reason that you have hope. And I just felt like I was supposed to share my faith statement today. And I hope that's all right. I'm hopefully going to add some new details, some new insights to it. And my prayer is that maybe in my story, you find a part of your story. Or more importantly, you find a part of God's story. Because when it's our stories that become intertwined, that's what Christianity and community looks like. Does that sound all right? And so I'm going to begin my story by telling you guys about the hardest race that I've ever run. This was back in 2008 because I'm old. Patty says no. I mean, comparatively, no, but sorry. Patty is one of our elders and lives up to the title. No, we tease each other in all of our meetings. This is not hateful. This is, I think, loving, maybe. Who knows? You may not see me next week. No, but I want to tell you guys about the hardest race that I've ever run. I was back in 2008. I had run the Chicago Marathon on Sunday, 26.2 miles around the Windy City. And then 2 days later, I hopped on a plane and I flew 17 hours to Zambia. At that point in time, that was the second longest flight that you could book, and it was a long one. Got off of that flight, landed, and then we got on to a smaller airplane. And I have this kind of theory when it comes to airplanes. There's this kind of middle ground where I feel really safe and comfortable, but if a plane gets too big, like you ever been on the ones that have like a staircase in them? Like, that doesn't make sense to me. That shouldn't be able to fly. Like, that makes me nervous. Or on the other end, have you ever been on a really small plane where it feels like a school bus with wings, where you have to step over like the hump where the wheel is? Also makes me nervous. I mean, it was one of those. And we flew another couple hours, and then we landed. And then we got on a shuttle bus that was meant to drive on roads, but we drove it off-road for 5 hours, hitting potholes almost as bad as the ones in Johnson County, until we finally came to this village that we were going to visit. It was actually a site where World Vision had been working. Those are called ADPs, Area Developmental Programs. And see, when World Vision does work, they don't just come in, do something, and then leave. They come in, they research the area, they work with the indigenous people, they hire indigenous people, and they set up a long-term program that's going to be sustainable. So a lot of times, they're in a community for 15 to 20 years, and we were actually visiting one of those ADPs that was at the end of that cycle that World Vision had been there working. And they knew we were from World Vision. They knew that we were runners. And so they decided to host a race in honor of us. And they did everything they could to make it like an official race. They had a big hand-drawn banner at the start and the finish. They did bib numbers that they hand wrote on pieces of paper with a Sharpie and then stapled them to our jerseys. In fact, if you were to take a look at my Team World Vision jersey, you would actually see the holes in the side where those staples were. But there were a few things that they did a little different than we do races here. At races in America, we usually start and finish at the same spot. We run a giant loop so that you can drive to the race, run the race, and then drive home. They did not do that. They did point to point, which meant that the entire thing could be uphill. And it was. It also meant that when you finished, you were that far away from where you needed to be. It was also at elevation at the end of their dry season, and my body was just beat. But here they were hosting this race. It was about a 9-mile race, and I couldn't turn down the opportunity to do that. And so I remember lining up to start that race, thinking it's going to be a long day. And them yelling go and taking off running and starting to hit those hills and just feeling like my legs were going to give out. And then I remember about a mile into the race bumping into somebody that I had met the day before. See, the day before we'd been walking around the village touring it. And well, whenever you're in Zambia and you look like this, you draw a lot of attention. Most Zambians did not know that skin could get this pale. Yeah, so you're weird. You're out of place. And so they're wondering why you're there. And so there's a group of kids that were following us around and asking questions. And our guide was kind of helping us communicate with them. And he starts asking them, who's going to run the race tomorrow? And a bunch of those kids throw their hand up in the air as quick as they can. They were so excited that they were going to be a part of it. So then our guide asked them the question, well, which one of you is the fastest? And the 16-year-old girl, I learned her name was Victoria. There's a picture of her. She steps forward and in the coolest Zambian accent ever says, I am. And so, doing the most reasonable thing I could think of, I challenged her to a race. And so we lined up to do a 100-yard dash from here to the tree that was over there, and all the kids lined up on the side cheering for us, and it was kind of this fun little spectacle, and I got schooled. And everybody was cheering for Victoria, and it was kind of this awesome little moment. So the next day, about a mile into the race, I bump into Victoria. And I realized that we're both hurting. It's going to be a long day for both of us. So I ask her if she wants to run with me. And we start doing that. We're running, we're walking, we're running, we're walking, we're making it up each hill together. And at one point, about 2/3 of the way through the race, I'm going up this really tall hill with her. We're both hurting. We're trying to encourage each other. And I just had this moment where I stopped and I asked myself the question, how in the world did I get here? Like, how did this pale dude from the Midwest end up running a race in the mountains of Zambia with a girl named Victoria? And see, that's the thing about God, is that if you begin to give God your life, you never know where you're going to end up. Like, you're going to end up in places where you're asking that same question, like, how in the world did this happen? How in the world did I get here? And that That is what I found myself asking that day. And that's the story that I want to tell you guys today, if that's all right. Does that sound good? If it's not, I have nothing else. You can leave. I don't prepare a backup. No, this story is actually going to start when I was 8 years old. In case you need a visual, that's what I look like. Some of you said, "aw," and then two of you went, "ew." I relate to you two. So, no, this story starts when I was 8 years old. When I was 8 years old, I went to have my tonsils removed. Anybody with me? Anybody here living without tonsils, surviving? Yeah. So I went in to do this surgery. My parents told me it was going to be pretty quick and easy. They told me that when I was done, I was going to get a new Lego set, and there was a rumor about some popsicles. And so I was feeling pretty good about it. So I went into surgery, and soon after they started, they discovered that I have a rare medical condition called malignant hyperthermia, which basically means that I am allergic to the gas used to administer anesthetics. And that when my body comes in contact with it, my body temperature just keeps rising and rising and rising. It doesn't stop. And back then, they weren't as aware of it, and they didn't have the antidote on hand. And so when it began to happen, it was a very touch-and-go situation. The doctors were acting as quickly as they could. They were putting me on ice. They were trying to get my body temperature down. My muscles were cramping. They were doing everything they could, and by the grace of God and the hard work of that medical staff, I survived. But it was a long journey. I ended up spending another 3.5 weeks in the hospital. My body had filled up with lactic acid, and they had to flush that out and get me back to where I could walk and be okay. And I remember when we were done, we were at one of the doctor appointments, and the doctor explained two things to my parents. One, that because of everything that my body had experienced, my muscles would probably develop a little slower than that of my peers. And number two, there were certain doctors that believed, at least at that time, that extreme physical activity could trigger another response like this. So in other words, be really, really careful if he ever decides to try to do any sports. And so I grew up. I wasn't allowed to do sports, so I became a nerd. Some of you laughed, like, obviously, yes, clear. And I became very good at duck hunt. Got a lot more Lego sets. But that was really hard for me because I, like a lot of little kids, wanted to do sports. I wanted to be a part of that. I watched all my friends be a part of that, but I couldn't. And that led me all the way up to my first day of high school. Anybody here remember that day? Patty, can you? Yeah. Sorry, I'm done now. I'm done. No, probably not. No, but I remember, so it was the first day of high school. And of course, I'm awkward, I'm scared, I don't know what I'm doing. And I remember I was trying to find one of my classes in the middle of the day. It was my biology class. And so I'm walking through the halls. I didn't know where I was going. And this coach was standing there in the hall. And he looked at me and he said, "You should run." And I thought he meant to class. So I took off booking it. He caught me after class and explained that he was the cross-country coach. And he thought I should run on the team. And I explained to him that I can't do sports. And I was thinking in my head, if there was a sport that I would ever try to do, I believe that one falls under extreme physical activity and would probably not be the one to try. And so I said no, and I walked away. But there was this voice in my head. There was this something that couldn't get over the fact that somebody had asked me to be on their team. Nobody had ever asked me to be on their team before. And so I remember laying in bed that night and just not being able to shake that thought. And I called my dad in. My dad would do this a lot. He would come in and he would sit at the end of my bed and we would just talk at night. It was one of my favorite things growing up. And I expressed to him what I was feeling. And my dad was really cool. He said, "Let's continue to pray about it. And if you keep feeling like this is something you should do, then we'll have a conversation about how to do it safely and maybe we can give it a shot." So another day goes by and another day goes by, and I just couldn't get those words out of my head. "You should run." And so I told my dad I wanted to give it a shot. I showed up at my first practice with a pair of basketball shoes on. I'd never run a mile before in my life, and I joined the team. And I started running. And we started having meets. And to my surprise, I wasn't the worst person on the team. I wasn't the slowest person on the team. I wasn't great, but I wasn't horrible. And for someone in my shoes, that was quite an accomplishment. Like, my parents were really proud of me. And so that was pretty exciting. But I'm also really competitive. Is anybody here really competitive? It's like, anybody here find themselves being really competitive at stupid things that don't matter? Like with your spouse? Maybe? Yeah, somebody? Yeah, I'm that person. Like, if I do something, I want to know that I can be the best at it, that I can perfect it. It's the reason I'm not allowed to have games on my phone. It's because I'll do nothing but try to be the best at it and perfect it, and my whole life will fall apart. And that's how I am with things. And so when it came to running cross country, although my parents were proud of me, although I was doing better than expected, I was really frustrated because I knew that because of my physical condition, I was never going to be the best. And so I remember it got down to the last regular season meet of the year. Coach had said the top 9 that finished, you guys are going to be on the team as we move forward into regionals and sectionals and hopefully state. And the rest of you guys, it's been a good year. Hope to see you next year, but your season will be done. And I remember sitting in my room and telling my dad, this has been a really good experience, but I think it's going to be my last race. I'm getting too frustrated with the fact that I'm never going to be great at this, and I think it's time to walk away. And my dad was really cool. He said, I respect that, but first I want you to do something. My dad reached up on my bookshelf and he pulled off the Teen Study Bible. This exact one right here. This Bible was doing Pride Month before Pride Month was a thing. Anybody else ever have this Bible? Anybody in here? 2 of you. Do you still have it? Keep it. Collector's item. You know, my dad pulled that Bible out. He opened it to Philippians 4:13, a verse that a couple of our confirmation students said was their favorite verse. And he told me to read it. Does anybody know what it says? It says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And then my dad asked me this question. He says, what things? And I said, all things. He said, does that include the race tomorrow? And I begrudgingly said, yeah, I guess it does. He says, here's what I want you to do. I want you to go out there and I want you to run for God. I want you to run for something bigger than yourself. I want you to run to give God glory. Whether you finish first or whether you finish last, I want you to run in a way that gives God glory. And then try to do that. You finish tomorrow. If you still want to be done, you can be done, but let's give that a shot. I said, okay. Next morning rolls around. My dad catches me at the start line, and he asked me if I want to pray. And one of my teammates was nearby, and he said, hey, I'll pray with you guys. I'll join in. And so we knelt down right there, and we said a little prayer. We prayed just that God would take this race and somehow use it for something bigger than myself. And the gun goes off. It's a 3-mile race. And to this day, I don't remember the first 2 miles. I remember coming around the turn for the last mile and realizing that I was in second place for our varsity squad. I didn't know what was going on. I was kind of freaking out. I ended up finishing, I think, 3rd for our varsity squad because I just didn't know what was happening. I was just, how did I end up here? And I crossed the finish line, and I had all these people coming up to me and being like, whoa, who are you? Like, I've been here all year. And they're like, well, what happened? What changed? And the only answer I had for them is that I tried to run for something bigger than myself. And I decided to keep running. And over the next several years of high school, every race I would kneel down at that start line and pray that same prayer. Had other teammates join in and pray with me. And God used that as a big part of my life as I went through high school. I want to jump ahead in my story, though, because I went to college and I made a decision that I regret. I chose not to run. It was partly because I wanted to focus on my studies, and partly because I knew that while I had done pretty good in high school, I was never going to be like pro level. I was never going to go to the Olympics. I was never going to win a medal. And so I thought, what's the point of continuing to run? So I didn't. So by the time I graduated, I was 24 years old, and I was out of shape. And, well, if you want to see a picture of me, there we are. It's me with a fro. But I took on my first ministry job. And while I was there, I had this defining moment for me. I was sitting in my office and I was reading a magazine. It's called Relevant Magazine. And in it, there was an article written by the lead singer of one of my favorite bands. And he was talking about a trip that he had taken to Africa. And while he was there, he experienced the poverty. He talked about seeing children lying in beds and then children lying on the floor waiting for a bed to open up. Sick, dying. Not because of some incurable disease, not because of some violent war, but simply because they didn't have enough. They lived in a part of the world stricken by poverty. And he goes on in that article. I got it right here. It hangs in my office. And he gives a number. He says every day, 20,000 children die due to poverty-related causes. Now, that number blew my mind. I couldn't comprehend it. In fact, I got out a calculator and started doing the math and discovered that that is one child every 5 seconds. In other words, in the amount of time that it took me to say that, we lost someone. Not due to some incurable disease or a violent war, but simply because they did not have enough. And as I read that article, my heart broke. The founder of World Vision has this quote. He says, "Let my heart be broken by the things that break the heart of God." And I'll tell you, one of the most powerful prayers that you can ever pray is to ask God to break your heart. And I say that for this reason, is I think that each of us, somewhere deep down inside of us, embedded into who we were created to be, that there is something in this world that crushes you, that breaks your heart. That when you hear about it, when you see that news story, tears well up, anger rises up inside of you. Maybe that's inequality, whether it be racial or economical. Maybe that's environmental issues. Maybe it's animal cruelty. Maybe it's domestic violence. Maybe it's poverty here in our country or poverty around the world. I don't know what it is for you, but I believe that God has embedded something in each of us that when we hear about it, we're crushed. It breaks our heart. And when we discover that thing, I think it's different for each of us. I think that's part of why the church needs each other, why there's diversity, because we all have different things that break our hearts. But when you discover what that is, God can begin to use you to make a difference in that area. Has anybody in this room discovered the thing that breaks their heart? Has anybody experienced that before? Yeah, it's a weird prayer to pray. But it can change your life if you ask God to break your heart for something that also breaks his heart. And that's what that article did. That's what that number did. That's what that 5 seconds did. But then I was also in this place where I didn't know what I could do. Like I'm stuck here living in the Midwest. I was working at a church. What difference could I make? At the same time, in my life, I was deciding that I wanted to get back into shape. I missed running. I wanted to get back into it. And because I cannot set reasonable goals in my life, I decided the best way to do that is to run a marathon, a 26.2-mile race. And I'd grown up in Illinois, so Chicago sounded fun. It's one of the biggest in the world, so why not do that? Does anybody else set goals like that? You know, there's no moderation. It's just all or nothing. I'm going to clean the whole house today. That's me. And so that was my goal. And so I decided that I was going to sign up for it. I apologize. We're having some issues with my slides here. My iPad keeps airing out. But I decided I wanted to get back into shape. I decided I wanted to run the Chicago Marathon. And so I went online to sign up for it. And I started to panic. I was kind of freaking out. Like, what am I doing? It was the longest online form I'd ever seen in my entire life. And every form fill that I filled out, every time I hit the word tab, my hand started to shake a little more. I'm like, do I really want to commit to doing this? And in the middle of filling it out, my wife comes in and says, hey, I need to run to the store. Do you want to come with me? And I said, yes, anything to not click that submit button. And so I went with her. The next day, I go back onto the site to finish filling out the form, and there's a big banner on the Chicago Marathon website. It says the race is full. Registration is filled up. We've hit our max number. I'm sorry, you'll have to sign up next year. I was really bummed because that was like the race that I wanted to do. But then I saw this little link on there. It said you could still run for a charity if you want to. So I clicked that link and I started scrolling through the alphabetical list of charities. Got all the way down to the bottom. I discovered this new team called Team World Vision. And they were coming together because they were going to run to raise money for clean water in some of the most impoverished parts of Africa. Because too many people were dying because they simply didn't have enough and they wanted to do something about it. I continued to read what this whole team was about, and they explained that 771 million people lack access to clean water. They're forced to travel to water sources like this, collect water, and then walk 3 to 5 miles back to their village with it. And that they wanted to do something about it. And it was this moment for me where it was like these two things collided. This thing that was breaking my heart, but this thing that I was also wanting to accomplish and do in my life. This problem that I had discovered and this passion that I had developed came together in that moment. And I was like, I need to do this. And I signed up. And I trained and I went and I ran for them and I had this good experience. And then I came back to where I was living at the time, Springfield, Missouri. And I said, I'm going to do this again next year, but I'm going to find a couple people to run with me. And when I said that in my head, what I was imagining was finding a couple of those like weird short wearing dudes that are really fast who would help me be faster, and then I could help them fundraise, and we'd be like this cool little mini training group, and I was really excited about that. But as we started getting the word out, do you know what happened? I had 30 people show up, most of them saying, hey, I have never run a marathon before in my life, but if you're going to train us to do it, this cause sounds awesome, we're in. And I became an impromptu marathon coach. Me and my wife, we were Googling every week what we were supposed to be doing, and we started meeting at a local park and running on the trails together and doing our long runs together and fundraising together. And then when the time came, we carpooled up to Chicago together and we ran the marathon. And it was such a crazy experience that it caught the attention of the leaders of Team World Vision, and they reached out to me, and they invited me and my wife, Sally, to go visit one of the World Vision sites in Zambia. And that's how I got to the hardest race that I had ever run. And if you could just change over to that next slide. For some reason, the iPad's not working. So I found myself 2/3 of the way through that race going up that hill with Victoria, feeling like I wanted to quit, like I didn't have any more to give. And then I remembered back to that verse that my dad had me read. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. But then I began to remember a scholar that I had read in college as he had wrote about that verse. His name's Ben Witherington III. Have you ever heard a more scholarly, nerdy name than that? And he writes about this verse, and he says that we often use it out of context. He says we often turn it into the Superman verse. We use it to justify us doing whatever we want to do. I'm going to win the Super Bowl because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I'm going to win the election because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. I'm going to accomplish whatever I want because I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And while it can be a motivational verse like that, that's not what it really is in its context. So if you look at where it's written, it's in the book of Philippians. When Paul, who wrote it, he was under house arrest. The last time he was in that city, he was beaten, flogged, thrown into a dungeon, and thought he was going to die. And he's writing to a church that's being persecuted, unsure of its own future. And in that section, he says, I know what it's like to have plenty. I know what it's like to have nothing. And then he gets to that verse and he says, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. He says, if you look at the original language and the original context there, it could probably be translated better. And instead of all things, he's referring to what he's dealing with in the moment, all these things. And instead of do, what he's talking about is endure. He argues that it would better be translated like this: I can endure all these things through the power of the one who gives me strength. And at first that might sound like a downgrade, like it's not as powerful. But I don't know about you, but for me, that hits a little harder. Because there have been a lot of moments in life where I didn't feel like I was conquering everything and taking over the world like Superman. I felt like I was just trying to press on. Has anybody ever been there before? And it's in those moments that we have a Jesus that comes into our life and gives us the strength we need to endure all these things. And I thought about that translation as I was in that moment running with Victoria. And we found the strength to make it up that hill and the next hill and the next hill until we got to the very last turn. And we can see the finish line. And I'll never forget the moment we grabbed each other's hand. There's actually a picture of it here. And we crossed that finish line together. And when we crossed it, I remember looking over. And the finish line was actually marked by a clean water well that had been dug by World Vision. And after the race, we went over to that well. And there's a picture here. I had the moment, the opportunity of pumping that well and splashing the water around and playing with the kids in it and hearing stories from the people in the village as they were talking about what a difference that water had made. In fact, in their culture, they had this saying that water is life and that water had given them life. And then I began to talk to the architects, the engineers that had put that in. And I asked, how much money did it cost to do this? And when they gave me the amount, it was nearly identical to the amount of money that our team in Springfield, Missouri had raised that year. And that's when it hit me. Yet another interpretation of that verse, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. Have you ever had that happen? A passage you've read so many times before, but you keep coming back to it, and there's new life in it. See, as I was looking at that well, that I remembered that when Paul writes these letters like the Corinthians and Colossians, Ephesians, Philippians, Galatians, he's writing these letters to churches. He's writing these letters to be brought in front of a congregation and read aloud to a group of people. And so when he says you, he doesn't mean you as an individual. He means you as a group. When Paul is encouraging them, saying, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, and then goes on and says, and God will meet all of your needs, he's not talking about your individual needs. He's talking about your needs as a church, as a community. He's talking about the power of what happens when we come together in Jesus' name and try to accomplish something. And that is what our team had a chance to do. And that brings me to what I want to close with today. It's a word that we've been using lately at World Vision, the word Ubuntu. Now, one of the translations, a more literal translation of this word, means, next slide here, humanity to others, to show humanity to others. But there's another translation that a lot of people use, and it says, I am because we are. I love that. And what it's saying is that we exist when we come together, when we are one, when we are united. And I believe that is true in the body of Christ, that when we come together, we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. We can endure all these things through Christ who gives us strength. So that's my story. And I hope that it wasn't too boring for you guys. I hope that maybe some of you got something out of it. I hope that maybe someone in this room is trying to find the strength to make that next step, to get up that next hill. And maybe God can use this to inspire you in some way. That's my hope. That's my prayer. We're going to close here with a little video, and the band's going to come back up and play. And here's my challenge for you guys. We are launching another team for Team World Vision. We are going to be training to run the Kansas City half marathon and full marathon. And if there's any part of you that is interested in what that might look like in your life, if you're wondering what it would feel like to cross a finish line marked by clean water, if you're interested in making a difference like that, if that stat that I read was something that broke your heart, and you want to do something about it, we're going to hold a little meeting up here, just right in front of these seats in front of the cross here. It's just going to be about 10 minutes long where we talk a little bit about it. It's not a commitment meeting. You can just come if you're interested. You just kind of hover in the back if you're really scared. But we just wanted to give you guys an opportunity to learn a little bit more about this part of my story, my journey. But even if you don't, my prayer for you guys today is that together, as a church, we can continue to press on to run the race that God has called for us. And that when it gets hard, that we can remember the words in that Bible that my dad handed me that evening. That we can do all things through Christ who gives us strength. That we can endure all this through Christ who gives us strength. Together as a church. Amen?
Ubuntu is very important to us. It basically means I am because we are.
We are all here united, moving our feet to make a difference in the world. We don't run for ourselves, but we run for more, right?
I run for World Vision to raise money to help the kids that carry these 20-pounder, some water for miles, and I do this running for them.
It's unspeakable to think that 1,000 children are dying every single day. It's not just my kids, it's not just somebody else's kids, it's our kids. I've seen moms who would do anything for their kids. They would, in essence, give up their entire life walking for water for their kids that even makes them sick. And it's something that's solvable.
Having clean water allows the kids to be with their family, to be in school. It really is like it's changing whole communities because water is the basis for health in every way of life.
There is something that you can do right now where you are and make a profound difference in somebody else's life. If you've never run before, World Vision has gotten thousands of people across the finish line. We have training plans that can get you from the couch to the course. And believe in yourself and believe that you are in capable hands with God and your community and that you can do this.
Just do it.
If I can do it,
Just do it, seriously.
you can do it.
You know, this whole thing started about 4 years ago. I quit smoking. I've had 5 knee surgeries. So this is a total gift that God's given back to me. I need to do something with it.
I mean, the idea of running even a half marathon at 60 years old was like, well, that's a crazy thing to do. When you get to that finish, you know, there's a group there, high fives and cowbells, and it's an awesome community.
You might be thinking, I'm not a runner. I can't do this.
Give it up for an 86-year-old Henry!
You are not alone. You can conquer a marathon because we run together. And together, we can help end the global water crisis in our lifetime. You are because we are.